4 armed riders circled his cabin, torches blazing, voices sharp with fury. They didn't ask. They demanded. "Send the boy out," they growled, "or we'll burn this place to the ground." Inside, a wounded native teen bled quietly on Thatcher Kane's kitchen table. Outside, rifles were cocked. Tension crackled like lightning in a dry storm. But Thatcher didn't move. He didn't flinch when they spat on his porch. Didn't speak when they cursed his name. Then, a single arrow sliced through the night. It didn't hit a man, it hit a holster, and sent a gun tumbling to the dirt. The message was clear, and what came next would test mercy, memory, and who a man becomes when the world draws its line. But long before the arrow flew, before rifles were drawn and names were shouted, there was only a quiet ranch and a man trying to forget the past. Earlier that day, the wind had stirred low and restless across the canyon, whispering through brittle sagebrush and over the dry wood of an old front porch. The sun had bled out behind the ridge like a wound that refused to close, casting the world in rust and shadow. Thatcher Kane sat in his creaking rocking chair, a half-empty mug of coffee cooling at his feet. Rifle leaned nearby, not out of fear, but out of habit. The kind of habit a man forms after he's seen enough things go wrong to stop expecting them to go right. He was a man made hollow by grief, a former soldier who once survived the war, only to lose more in peacetime. First came the fever that took his wife. Then 3 winters ago, the sickness that claimed his only boy. He hadn't said the child's name out loud in years. Folks in town called him quiet, distant, the kind of man who kept to himself and let the world keep on burning. He didn't argue with them. Silence had become easier than trying to explain the weight he carried. So when the knock of boots and the buzz of flies broke his evening stillness, when he stepped to the edge of his porch and saw the crumpled figure in the dirt, he didn't reach for his gun. Not right away. There was too much blood, and something in that boy's posture, in the way his body was twisted with pain, but not fear. Something about it reached through the years and gripped the center of Thatcher's chest. He could have turned away. He could have shut the door and pretended not to see. In this land, that was the safer choice, the expected choice. But that's not what he did, because some ghosts don't knock. They arrive in silence and ask who you are now that the world has stopped watching. What would you do if your act of kindness could trigger a war? The buzz of flies came first, then the ragged breaths. Thatcher Kane stood at the edge of his porch, squinting against the last rays of dying sunlight. Just beyond the fence line, where dry grass met dust, something moved, a twitch, barely more than a ripple in the dirt. Then he saw it clearly, a body, face down, still. He stepped off the porch, slow and cautious, boots crunching on brittle earth. The rifle stayed in his hand, but lowered. 30 feet out, he could make out the torn buckskin, the sheen of blood soaked into the fabric, the broken shafts of arrows protruding from the figure's shoulder and thigh. It was a boy, no older than 16, maybe younger, skin the color of riverstone, hair matted with sweat and dirt. One eye fluttered open as Thatcher knelt beside him, wide and black with pain, but not fear. That's what made Thatcher hesitate. The boy didn't look afraid of him. He looked afraid of dying alone. A sound escaped the boy's throat. A name? A plea? The wind carried it away. Thatcher reached for the arrows but stopped. The shafts had been snapped off, clean, deliberate. The boy had escaped something or someone. "Easy," Thatcher muttered, more to himself than the kid. "Let's not kill you trying to save you." He glanced back at the cabin, its lone lantern beginning to glow behind the window pane. Then he looked east, past the fence, toward the hills where shadows lengthened like claws across the earth. Denton Crowley's spread was just 3 ridges over. And folks like Crowley didn't take kindly to a man hauling wounded natives onto his land. Thatcher swallowed hard. He thought of his boy. 3 winters ago, when the fever came howling through the valley like a curse, Thatcher had sat helpless beside a shivering bed. His son's face flushed, his little body burning up with sickness. They'd buried him before the thaw. No one came, not even the pastor. Just snow, dirt, and silence. Now here was this stranger, this child, bloodied and broken in the dust. And Thatcher Kane, ghost of a man, soldier of no war, had a choice. He dropped the rifle, bent down, lifted the boy into his arms. The weight surprised him. Not heavy, but limp, like a deer bled out too long. The boy groaned, his fingers brushing Thatcher's collar weakly. "Name?" Thatcher asked softly, stepping over the fence line, boots kicking up dust. The answer came faint and cracked. "Sia, Ashfall." "Sia." Thatcher nodded. "All right then, Saya, let's get you off the ground." He carried him across the yard, heart pounding not from the weight, but from what he knew would follow. Tracks in the dirt, blood at his door, neighbors with questions, maybe torches. This wasn't just about a boy. It was about what kind of man Thatcher Kane still was, and whether mercy was worth the price. A choice made in dust and blood, one that would echo for generations to come. The cabin's wooden door groaned shut behind them. Inside, the air was thick with lamp oil, wood smoke, and blood. Thatcher laid Saya Ashfall down gently on the kitchen table. The boy winced but made no sound. His breaths were shallow, chest hitching with each one. Thatcher reached for the small tin box beneath the stove. Bandages, whiskey, and a needle he hadn't used since the fever days. He unscrewed the flask and splashed the liquor across the wound. Saya hissed, his body arching, but didn't cry out. Brave kid, or maybe just too far gone to scream. "You're lucky," Thatcher muttered, slicing open the blood-soaked buckskin with a rusted blade. "Arrows missed your artery. You lose another pint, though, and I'll be digging another grave." Sia's eyes fluttered. His lips moved. Thatcher leaned closer. "Washiku," the boy whispered. "What?" "Washiku," he repeated, more urgent this time. Thatcher didn't recognize the word, but the way Saya said it made his spine prickle. It wasn't fear for himself in that voice. It was warning. It was fear for the man trying to save him. "All right," Thatcher said under his breath. "What did I just drag into my home?" He stepped away to rinse the needle, but something stopped him. Not a sound, not movement, the absence of both. Silence. The kind of stillness a man only noticed when he'd spent enough nights listening for death. Wind had died. Crickets vanished. Even the old wood stove seemed to hold its breath. Thatcher turned slowly toward the window. Beyond the glass, the tree line stood black against the indigo dusk, motionless. But it wasn't empty. He could feel it. Eyes watching. He didn't know how many. 5? 10? More? He'd seen this kind of patience before, crouched behind Union lines while war drums pounded in the distance. It was the kind of silence that didn't come with peace, but with preparation. "Sia," he said carefully. "You said Washiku. What does it mean?" The boy's eyes opened just enough to meet his. "White men," he rasped. Then slowly he shook his head. "Not you. The others. The ones who chased me. Killed the others. Others. Plural." Thatcher's jaw clenched. So the boy wasn't running from his own kind. He was running from a slaughter. And the shadows outside. They weren't here to rescue him. They were here to judge. To punish. A floorboard creaked beneath his boot as he stepped toward the window. Just that one sound, one breath. And suddenly the forest seemed to ripple. Just slightly. Like something shifted. One wrong breath would turn his cabin into a battleground. The first glow came from the east. A dull, flickering orange that didn't belong to moon or stars. A torch. Then another. Then 4. Thatcher Kane set his whiskey jar down and stepped outside, the cabin door groaning behind him. The wind had picked up, restless again, and it carried voices. By the time the riders breached the edge of his yard, the scene looked like something pulled straight from an old war dream. 4 men on horseback, eyes hard, torches in hand, rifles at their sides. Horses snorted and stamped as they neared the porch, uneasy in the scent of smoke, blood, and tension. Denton Crowley led the group, seated tall on a dappled gray gelding. His face, shadowed by the brim of a sweat-darkened hat, held the grim confidence of a man who always expected to be obeyed. Beside him rode Merritt Slade, the meaner of the two, thinner, wirier, and twitchy as a snake in dry grass. "Evening, Kane," Crowley called, voice flat. "You been busy?" Thatcher said nothing. He didn't need to. His stillness was answer enough. Slade nudged his horse forward, torch held high, eyes scanning the ground. Saw tracks cross the ridge. Hoof prints headed toward your land. You seen anything strange? Thatcher shifted his weight. It's been quiet. That right? Slade leaned to spit in the dirt. Because we're missing 6 head of cattle. One of the boys said he saw smoke on your end. Fresh. You calling me a liar, Merritt? Thatcher asked, voice low. I'm calling it convenient. Behind them, 2 other men dismounted and began walking the perimeter. One had a shotgun cradled loosely in his arms. The other wore a long coat and the hollow-eyed expression of someone who'd been itching for a fight all day. Thatcher's mind drifted, not out of distraction, but memory, to another time, another war, a village in smoke, a woman crying in a language he didn't know, and him standing at the edge of it all, rifle in hand, too afraid to speak up, too trained to stay silent. By morning, that village was ash, and he had carried the silence like a wound ever since. Not tonight. He stepped off the porch, rifle slung casually over his shoulder, not raised, but not out of reach either. You're looking in the wrong direction, Thatcher said. There's nothing here but me and my land. Crowley's face hardened. You sure about that? Dead sure. Slade leaned forward, eyes narrowing. If you're hiding one of them in there, if you're lying to us… Thatcher cut him off. You think I don't know what you're looking for? Then move, Crowley barked. Let us see for ourselves. Thatcher took a single step forward. If you won't move, Kane, Slade said, voice rising, we'll go through you. The wind carried silence for half a breath. Then Thatcher's voice, calm and cold. Then you better be ready to bury more than cattle. No one moved. Even the horses seemed to freeze, because there was something in the way he said it, like a man who'd already counted the cost, already chosen the hill he'd die on. It wasn't bravado. It was conviction, the kind that came from a grave dug 3 winters ago. From inside the cabin came no sound, but behind the tree line, in the deeper dark, there was movement, a flicker of shadow, a shape that shouldn't be there. And suddenly, Thatcher wasn't the only one aware that more eyes were watching. The men shifted in their saddles, nervous now. One of the horses pawed the dirt and snorted. Slade's hand hovered over his holster. Don't be stupid, Kane. I was stupid once, Thatcher replied. Didn't speak when I should have. Not tonight. And just like that, the balance tipped. Not with a bullet, but with silence, thick as oil, stretching between them all. A whisper cut through the air, high and sharp. In the span of a single heartbeat, every man's head turned. An arrow. It sliced through the torchlight with eerie precision, catching the edge of Merritt Slade's holster mid-sentence. The leather strap burst open, and his revolver tumbled to the ground, kicking up a puff of dust. No one breathed. Slade's horse bucked sideways, eyes wide with panic. He scrambled to stay mounted, one hand flailing for balance, while the other hovered instinctively over his now empty hip. Crowley's voice broke the silence, ragged and sharp. Where? But he didn't finish the sentence, because every man now knew. They were not alone. Eyes turned to the tree line. Just beyond the firelight, shadow met shadow, but something moved in the dark. Dozens of somethings. Shapes too tall for bushes, too quiet for animals. Warriors. They hadn't come charging. They didn't shout or threaten. They were simply there, waiting. Slade cursed and swung down from his saddle, scooping up his pistol. It's a damn ambush. No, Thatcher said, stepping between them. It's a warning. Crowley turned on him. You brought them here? I didn't bring anyone, Thatcher replied. But they're watching, same as you, waiting to see what kind of men we are. Slade's eyes narrowed. They'll kill us all. Thatcher gestured to the fallen gun. If they wanted blood, you'd be dead already. That arrow could have gone through your neck. It didn't. The wind shifted again, cooler now, dragging the tension sideways like a rip in a still lake. The firelight flickered across Crowley's weathered face. Behind his eyes, gears turned slow and heavy. But Slade was still coiled, still hungry for something to shoot. Then Thatcher's voice dropped, lower, steadier, worn with memory. This is who you came to kill? A bleeding child? Crowley's jaw twitched. He's 16, Denton. Can't weigh more than 100 pounds soaking wet. You think he rustled your cattle? Started a war? Look at him. He can barely lift his head. Slade sneered. Doesn't matter what he looks like. He's one of them. And that's enough for you? Thatcher stepped closer. That's enough to hang a boy? The silence that followed was not empty. It was cracked and heavy and loud in the way only conscience can be. Then Thatcher spoke again, but this time, he didn't talk about Saya. He talked about someone else. There was a rancher once, he said slowly, up near the Red Hills, back before the war. He found a Sioux boy, wounded bad, left for dead by another settler. Took him in, hid him, fed him. Neighbors found out, tried to torch his barn in the night. Slade spat. Let me guess. They killed him. Thatcher shook his head. No. You know what happened? He let the question linger, then answered it himself. Nothing. No one burned the house. No arrows flew. The tribe came. They saw, and they left, peacefully, because someone had shown mercy, and they answered with the same. Crowley rubbed a hand over his mouth, gaze flicking again toward the woods. Slade laughed, but it was hollow. You believe in fairy tales, Kane? I believe in what I saw, Thatcher said. Peace doesn't always come from treaties. Sometimes it comes from one man doing the decent thing in the middle of madness. He let that hang, then added, and madness is exactly what this becomes if someone fires the next shot. Another gust of wind whistled across the ridge. In the dark, no voices rose, but the warriors remained, waiting. Crowley shifted in the saddle, and for the first time, the fire in his eyes dimmed. The silence that had blanketed the yard finally broke, not with a gunshot, but with a voice, weak, raspy, and edged with pain. He's not one of them, Sia Ashfall said, pushing himself upright in the cabin doorway. His buckskin shirt was stained with blood, and his face was pale as bone, but his eyes were steady. Not the ones who took the cattle. Everyone turned. Crowley frowned. You're supposed to be bleeding, boy. I am. Sia's lips barely moved. Still doesn't make me blind. Thatcher took a step toward him. You sure you should be up? Sia nodded once, then looked straight at the men in the yard. It wasn't us, he said. It was white men. 3 days ago. They drove the cattle north, toward the mining camps. We tried to stop them. One of them had red hair, long beard. I shot him before we lost them in the dust. Merritt Slade scoffed. Red hair? Could be anybody. That's right, said another settler, stepping forward. You expect us to believe a bleeding savage over our own? But the seed had been planted. Another man, older, lean-faced, eyes narrowed, tilted his head. Wait, red beard, big shoulders, crooked nose? Sia nodded. The man turned to Crowley. That sounds like Rusk Holloway. Slade's face darkened. That's a reach. No, the man said slowly. He's been running deals with some miners near Silver Bluff. I heard he got tossed out of Crow's saloon last week for trying to trade rustled beef. Enough hearsay, Slade snapped. This boy could have heard that name from anyone. Except he didn't say the name, Thatcher said quietly, stepping beside Sia. He described the man. Details only someone who saw him would know. Slade's jaw flexed, fist clenched. Still doesn't prove he didn't help them. Could be part of the same crew. Sia's voice cracked as he spoke again. They killed my cousin, left him for the coyotes. That's how I got away. The words dropped like stones into the dust. Crowley's eyes shifted, first to Thatcher, then to the boy, then to the darkened trees. And Thatcher saw it, doubt, not full acceptance, but the first crack in the wall of certainty that had brought them here with guns drawn. He stepped forward, placing himself fully between Sia and the settlers. You want to keep calling him a liar, Thatcher said, voice firm, but you heard what he said. You saw how he looked when he said it. Slade opened his mouth, but Thatcher raised a hand. No more talk of savages. This boy bled on my table and still stood to speak truth to your face. Whether you believe him or not, that's on your conscience. But if it had been your cattle stolen, if it had been your boy gunned down in the dirt, would you not want someone to speak for him? Crowley stared hard at the ground. Slade kicked at the dust, angry and twitching, like a fuse still looking for fire. And Thatcher finished. Sometimes justice wears a face people refuse to believe, until it's their cattle missing. No one spoke, but something shifted in the yard. The torches didn't burn quite so bright. The hands gripping rifles lowered. Even the horses, restless before, had gone still, as if waiting too. The first sound came just before dawn, hooves hard and fast, tearing up dry earth from the north. The men still gathered at Thatcher Kane's fence line turned at once, rifles twitching, eyes narrowing. The scout rode in from the mining camps, his coat streaked with dust, face set with urgency. He didn't wait to dismount before blurting, "They got him." A pause. Rusk Holloway, red beard, arrow still healing in his shoulder. He was trying to sell stolen beef to the miners at Silver Bluff. "They're holding him now." Silence followed, not the kind thick with tension, but the kind that sucks the heat from a man's face and leaves him blinking in the brightening dawn. Crowley's shoulders sagged like someone had yanked a weight off his back and replaced it with a heavier one. He didn't look at Saya when he spoke. "Looks like, we owe you an apology." Saya, leaning against the cabin's door frame, said nothing. His bandaged shoulder rose and fell with shallow breaths, but he nodded once. Small, tired, but clear. Slade muttered a curse under his breath and turned away, spitting into the dirt. The rest of the riders began drifting off in pairs, torches dying as the sky turned from coal to ember. Some lingered longer than others. A few offered Thatcher a nod. One even looked Sire in the eye and tipped his hat, though he quickly glanced away. Crowley was the last to mount. He turned in his saddle. "You took a risk, Kane." Thatcher's voice was quiet. "So did you." Neither man smiled, but something passed between them, understanding maybe, or the weary recognition that they'd both stood too close to something that could have burned them all. Crowley rode off without another word. By full sunrise, the yard had emptied. But Thatcher wasn't alone. As golden light spilled across the valley, 15 riders crested the hill to the east. No war cries, no thunder, just hooves brushing earth and the distant calls of morning birds. 15 native warriors, faces painted in solemn hues, feathers trailing behind them like silent banners, rode in perfect formation down the slope. At their head was a man older than most, his dark hair streaked with gray, his posture proud. Torrin Blackroot. Thatcher stepped off the porch without a weapon, without armor, and stood at the center of his yard as they approached. The warriors didn't dismount. They didn't speak. But as they reached him, Torrin raised his right hand. A single gesture, one of respect, one of thanks. Sia stepped to Thatcher's side, still weak but standing tall. No words were exchanged. None were needed. Sometimes the greatest honor is given without a sound. And sometimes the only reward for choosing mercy is peace in your own heart. In the stillness of that western dawn, no bullets were fired, no speeches made, just a man who chose mercy and a boy who was finally seen for the truth he carried. In today's world, we might not face war parties at our doorstep, but we are still surrounded by choices that test our character. It's easy to judge by appearances. Easier still to stay silent when others raise their voices in fear or anger. But like Thatcher Kane, we all come to crossroads where doing what's right may cost us something. Our comfort, our pride, or even our standing in the eyes of others. The question is, will we stand anyway? This story reminds us that courage isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a quiet decision in the face of rising tension. Sometimes it's seeing past old prejudice. Sometimes it's opening your door when the world says to close it. What would you have done standing on that porch? Would you have risked everything to protect a boy the world had already judged? We'd love to hear your thoughts. What did this story make you feel? What lessons would you pass on to your children or your grandchildren? Leave a comment below. Let's keep this conversation going, not just about the past, but the kind of future we want to build. Thank you for joining us around the fire for this story. If it stirred something in you, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who believes in second chances. Because sometimes the smallest act of mercy becomes the legacy we leave behind. And that, friends, is a story worth telling.